The crack of Margaret's hand across Ariel's cheek echoed through the dining room. Swift, unyielding, a declaration of dominance, in front of the very friends Ariel had welcomed with open arms and quiet pride. Without missing a beat, Margaret pivoted to them, her lips curling into that polished veneer of disdain. "I don't know what back alley you drag these women from, Ariel, but this isn't some hood gathering, and I refuse to let my home become a pulpit for your black empowerment rants." She'd already scorned the sweet potato casserole as peasant slop and hurled it into the trash, interrogating their laughter, their stories, their existence. But the slap stripped away pretense. This was war over who truly owned the space. Her husband, Charles, froze, silent as stone. This wasn't mere conflict. It was the fracture that remade everything. If you've ever felt that sting of erasure, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, then hit subscribe for more tales of silent triumph. Because Ariel's response doesn't just fight back, it rebuilds the empire on her terms, leaving no room for doubt. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Ashbourne estate, casting intricate shadows on the polished mahogany floors that had borne the weight of generations. Ariel Johnson Ashbourne stood in the sunroom, her fingers tracing the edge of an antique sideboard she'd redesigned last year. A subtle fusion of Victorian elegance and modern minimalism. At 28, she was a force in Charleston's interior design scene, her portfolio brimming with transformations that turned forgotten spaces into sanctuaries. But in this house, her own home for 5 years, she often felt like an intruder, carefully navigating the invisible lines drawn by tradition and expectation. The estate was a relic of old Southern grandeur, towering columns, sprawling verandas, and gardens that whispered of antebellum secrets. It belonged to the Ashbourne family, and by extension, to Margaret Ashbourne, her mother-in-law, a woman whose lineage traced back to plantation owners and Confederate whispers. Margaret was the epitome of refined poise, always impeccably dressed, her words laced with honeyed politeness that masked a sharper edge. To the outside world, she was gracious, a pillar of Charleston's high society. But to Ariel, a black woman who had built her success from scratch, Margaret's courtesy was a veil over subtle disdain, comments about fitting in or toning down that chipped away at her spirit like water-eroding stone. Ariel's phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her reverie. It was a group chat notification from her closest friends, Janelle, Patrice, Latoya, and Amina. They were her anchors, a sisterhood forged in college and strengthened through years of triumphs and trials. Janelle, the brilliant professor whose lectures on African-American history could ignite a room. Patrice, the sharp-tongued lawyer who dismantled injustices in courtrooms. Latoya, the compassionate doctor healing communities one patient at a time. And Amina, the visionary artist whose works captured the raw beauty of Black experiences. They were coming to Charleston for a conference on women's empowerment, and the thought of seeing them filled Ariel with a warmth she hadn't felt in months. "I should invite them over for dinner," she murmured to herself, scrolling through the messages. It would be a chance to reconnect, to laugh without reservation, to share stories of their latest projects. In this house, where conversations often tiptoed around unspoken rules, their presence would be a breath of fresh air. But doubt crept in immediately. What would Margaret say? The last time Ariel had hosted friends, Margaret had remarked afterward how they were a bit too animated for the drawing room, too loud, too fashionable, too ethnic. The words had stung, a reminder that in this space, Ariel's world was expected to shrink to fit the Ashbourne mold. She found Charles in the study, hunched over his laptop, managing the family foundation's finances. Her husband was a steady man, kind in his quiet way, but his loyalty to his mother often left Ariel standing alone in the crossfire. "Hey," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "my friends are coming to town for that conference. I was thinking of having them over for dinner next week." Charles looked up, his expression neutral. "Sounds nice. Just, you know, keep it casual. Mother's been stressed with the garden club events." Ariel swallowed her frustration. "Casual? It's dinner, Charles, not a party, and I'll handle everything." He nodded, already turning back to his screen. I'm sure it'll be fine. Just run it by her first. Of course. Run it by Margaret. Ariel made her way to the garden, where her mother-in-law was tending to the roses, her gloved hands clipping stems with surgical precision. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, but it did little to ease the knot in Ariel's chest. Margaret, she began, forcing a smile, my friends from college are visiting for a conference. I'd like to invite them for dinner here next week, if that's all right. Margaret straightened, removing her gloves slowly. Her eyes appraised Ariel for a moment, as if weighing the request against some invisible scale. Your friends? The lively ones, I presume. There was a pause, heavy with implication. Very well, but do make sure it stays civilized. We wouldn't want to disturb the household. Ariel nodded, her jaw tight. Of course, thank you. As she walked away, the word civilized echoed in her mind like a warning shot. It was Margaret's code for conformity, for muting the vibrancy that defined Ariel and her circle. But she pushed the unease aside and dove into preparations. Over the next few days, she curated a menu that blended soul food traditions with upscale flair. Collard greens simmered with smoked turkey and herbs, cornbread muffins infused with honey and rosemary, caramelized sweet potatoes that evoked memories of her grandmother's kitchen, and a peach cobbler with a bourbon glaze. She arranged the dining table with crisp linens, fresh flowers from the market, and candles that would cast a warm glow over the evening. In the quiet moments, as she chopped vegetables or polished silverware, Ariel's thoughts wandered. This dinner wasn't just about food, it was a reclaiming of space. In a house where she often felt like an ornament, beautiful but secondary, hosting her friends would remind her of who she was beyond the Ashbourne name. She imagined Janelle's infectious laugh filling the room, Patrice's witty debates sparking lively discussion, LaToya's empathetic stories grounding them all, and Amina's creative insights inspiring new ideas. It would be a night of unfiltered joy, a bubble of authenticity in a world of polished pretense. Yet as the day approached, a lingering disquiet settled over her. Margaret had been unusually distant, retreating to her wing of the house more often than not. Ariel assumed, hoped really, that her mother-in-law would bow out gracefully, perhaps claiming a headache or a prior engagement. After all, Margaret had never shown much interest in Ariel's social circle before. Why would this be different? The evening arrived with a soft Charleston breeze rustling the magnolia trees outside. Ariel smoothed her dress, checked the table one last time, and waited for the doorbell. Her friends would be here soon, and for a few hours the estate might feel like home. But as the first car pulled into the driveway, she heard footsteps descending the grand staircase, deliberate, unhurried. Margaret was coming down, her presence already shifting the air like an approaching storm. The doorbell chimed like a herald of relief, pulling Ariel's attention from the staircase. Janelle was the first to arrive, sweeping in with her signature embrace, the kind that wrapped you in warmth and wisdom. Girl, this place is still straight out of a period drama, she teased, her voice carrying the easy cadence of someone who commanded lecture halls. Ariel laughed, guiding her to the dining room where the table gleamed under soft candlelight. Soon Patrice strode in, briefcase in hand as if she'd just left a courtroom victory, followed by LaToya with a bouquet of wildflowers and Amina, sketches peeking from her bag like secrets waiting to be unveiled. The evening unfolded like a long-awaited reunion. They settled around the table, plates filled with the soulful dishes Ariel had labored over. Conversation flowed effortlessly, Janelle sharing her latest research on Black women's roles in Reconstruction-era activism, Patrice recounting a pro bono case that had freed a wrongfully accused mother, LaToya describing her clinic's outreach program for underserved communities, and Amina unveiling plans for an exhibit celebrating Afrofuturism. The air hummed with empowerment, their voices weaving a tapestry of resilience and ambition. Ariel felt the weight of the estate lift, if only momentarily. Here in this circle, she wasn't the outsider. She was whole. But the footsteps on the staircase grew louder, deliberate echoes that cut through the laughter like a distant thunderclap. Margaret descended into the room, her entrance unannounced and inevitable. She paused at the threshold, surveying the scene with the cool detachment of a curator, appraising unsolicited art. The group fell into a polite hush, sensing the shift, but Ariel forced a smile. Margaret, I didn't expect you to join us. Would you like a plate? Margaret waved a hand dismissively, taking a seat at the head of the table as if it were her throne. No need, dear. I merely wanted to see what all the commotion was about. Her eyes flicked over the guests, lingering on Amina. What an interesting hairstyle, she said, her tone laced with feigned curiosity. Is that tribal? So exotic for Charleston. Amina stiffened but replied smoothly, It's inspired by my Somali roots, actually, a nod to ancestral strength. The comment hung awkwardly, but the friends pressed on, steering back to safer waters. Patrice launched into a story about her firm's push for diversity in legal education, her words passionate and precise. Margaret interrupted midway, leaning forward with a tight smile. So impressive. Your people are very vocal these days, aren't they? It's quite the trend. The room tensed, a subtle crack forming in the evening's facade. Ariel's fork paused midair, her heart pounding. She glanced at Charles, who had slipped in quietly and now sat at the far end, his expression blank as he poked at his food. No intervention, no defense, just silence. The group navigated around the barbs, but Margaret's presence loomed, her interjections growing bolder, questioning the relevance of their community projects in a city like ours. Dessert arrived, the caramelized sweet potatoes steaming with a glossy sheen of brown sugar and spices. Ariel served it proudly, a recipe passed down from her grandmother, elevated with a touch of nutmeg and vanilla. The friends murmured approvals, savoring bites that evoked home and heritage. Margaret took a small spoonful, her face contorting as if she'd tasted vinegar. This, she declared, pushing the dish away, is utterly unrefined. Peasant fare at best. Before anyone could respond, she rose, scooped up the serving dish, and marched to the sideboard's trash bin, dumping the entire contents with a resounding clatter. The sound reverberated like a slap to the soul. Ariel's blood boiled. This wasn't just food. It was her effort, her culture, discarded like refuse in front of those who mattered most. Margaret, please, she said, rising instinctively and reaching out to stop the older woman, her hand brushing the dish's edge. That's disrespectful to my guests, to everything I've... Margaret whirled, her eyes flashing with indignation. Disrespectful? In my own home? Her hand shot out, connecting with Ariel's cheek in a sharp, resounding slap that echoed through the room. The force sent Ariel staggering back a step, her skin stinging, the humiliation burning hotter than the blow. Don't you dare touch me, Margaret hissed, her voice low and venomous. You forget your place. Time froze. Janelle's hand flew to her mouth. Patrice's eyes narrowed in fury. Latoya half rose as if to intervene, and Amina gripped the table edge, her knuckles whitening. Charles remained seated, his fork suspended, his face a mask of inaction, silent as stone as always. The friends exchanged horrified glances, the joy of the evening evaporating into a thick, oppressive quiet. Latoya cleared her throat, setting down her napkin. I think it's time we go, she said softly, her voice trembling with restrained anger. Ariel touched her cheek, the welt already forming, but she straightened her spine. No, she said firmly, her gaze locking on each of them. Please stay. Now you truly see what I live with. The words hung heavy, a declaration not just to her friends but to herself. Margaret excused herself with a curt nod, retreating upstairs as if the incident were a minor inconvenience, leaving the room in stunned aftermath. The rest of the night limped on, the conversation subdued, laced with concern for Ariel. Her friends offered support, whispers of, "You don't deserve this," and "We're here for you." But the damage was done. As they departed one by one, hugging her tightly at the door, Ariel waved them off into the night, the estate's grandeur feeling more like a cage than ever. Upstairs in her room, alone at last, Ariel didn't cry. The slap's echo lingered, but so did a spark of clarity. She moved to her desk, pulling out the files she glanced at weeks ago, the power of attorney, the foundation records, the property deeds. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened them, but her resolve hardened. This wasn't the end of her silence. It was the beginning of her strategy. The estate settled into an uneasy hush after the friend's departure, the grand doors closing with a finality that mirrored the ache in Ariel's chest. Upstairs, in the dim glow of her bedside lamp, she stood before the mirror, fingers lightly tracing the reddened mark on her cheek. It throbbed like a fresh wound, but the real pain burrowed deeper into the recesses of her soul where years of quiet concessions had festered. No tears came, not tonight. Instead, a cold clarity sharpened her vision, turning humiliation into fuel. She turned away from her reflection and crossed to the desk, where a locked drawer held the remnants of her independence. As she slid open the drawer, memories flooded in unbidden, each one a thread in the tapestry of her erosion. It had started subtly, those first months after the wedding. Margaret's gentle suggestions to straighten her natural curls for family portraits. "It looks more polished, dear, more fitting for the Ashbourne albums." Ariel had complied, standing in the bathroom with a flat iron, watching her coils surrender to heat, just as she had begun to surrender parts of herself. Then came the dinner parties where Margaret would pull her aside. "Speak a bit softer, Ariel. Your voice carries so emphatically. We wouldn't want to overwhelm the guests." Over time, it extended to her friends. Invitations extended only to those who blended in, the ones with neutral accents and subdued styles, while her vibrant circle was deemed too much for the estate's refined air. Charles had never intervened, his silence a complicit shadow. "It's just how she is," he'd say with a shrug, as if Margaret's barbs were weather to endure rather than storms to challenge. Ariel remembered one evening vividly, a charity gala for the Ashbourne Foundation, where she'd proposed incorporating Black artists into the exhibits. Margaret had smiled that thin, patronizing smile. "How quaint. But let's keep it universal, shall we? No need to make it niche." Ariel had bitten her tongue, shrinking her ideas to fit the mold, all in the name of harmony. Harmony, that hollow word, a euphemism for erasure. In this house, peace meant invisibility, a slow suffocation where her blackness was tolerated but never celebrated, her achievements footnotes in the Ashbourne legacy. But tonight, the slap had shattered that illusion. Ariel's hands steadied as she pulled out the files, their edges worn from infrequent handling. First, the power of attorney Charles had signed during his hospital stay 3 years ago, after a minor surgery that had left him vulnerable. He'd handed over temporary control of family affairs to her, trusting her judgment in a rare moment of openness. "You're the steady one," he'd said then, his voice weak but sincere. She'd filed it away, never imagining it as a lifeline. Next, the joint property agreements, detailing shares in the Atlanta cottage, a quaint retreat they'd bought early in their marriage, funded partly by her design commissions. And finally, the thick binder on the Ashbourne Foundation, the philanthropic arm she'd co-founded, poured her expertise into grants for emerging artists and community revitalization projects. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching at the evidence of her contributions. Proposals she'd drafted, events she'd orchestrated, funds she'd secured through her network. The foundation had thrived under her touch, evolving from a dusty relic into a vibrant force. Yet Margaret had always credited it to family tradition, diminishing Ariel's role to that of a helpful spouse. "I didn't just marry into this name," Ariel whispered fiercely to the empty room, her voice echoing off the walls. "I helped it survive." The words ignited something primal within her, a reclaiming of narrative. This wasn't mere paperwork. It was proof of her power, buried but not broken. Outside, the Charleston night deepened, crickets chirping in rhythmic indifference. But inside, Ariel's mind raced. She recalled the subtle adjustments she'd made over the years, toning down her wardrobe from bold patterns to muted neutrals, curbing her laughter at family gatherings, even altering recipes to suit Margaret's refined palate. Each concession had been a brick in the wall of her silence, built to preserve the marriage, the home, the illusion of belonging. But silence wasn't peace. It was a prison, one she'd constructed herself. The slap had been the key turning in the lock, freeing a resolve she'd long suppressed. As dawn crept in, painting the room in soft grays, Ariel closed the files and reached for her phone. She scrolled through contacts until she found Elena Ramirez, her personal lawyer, a no-nonsense woman who'd handled her business contracts before the marriage. They'd lost touch amid the whirl of domestic life, but now Ariel typed a message. Need to meet, urgent, regarding family assets. She hit send, her pulse quickening with a mix of fear and exhilaration. This wasn't revenge, not yet. It was reconnaissance, a mapping of the battlefield she'd ignored for too long. Charles stirred in the adjoining bedroom, his footsteps approaching. He knocked softly before entering, his face etched with belated concern. Ariel, about last night. Mother's just stressed, traditional, set in her ways? Ariel cut him off, her tone even but edged. Save it, Charles. Your silence speaks louder than her hand ever could. He faltered, rubbing his neck. I didn't know what to do. It happened so fast. That's the problem, she replied, standing to face him. You never do. For the first time, she saw him not as her partner, but as a bystander in her story, a man caught between loyalty to his mother and love for his wife, paralyzed by both. He mumbled an apology and left, the door clicking shut like a chapter closing. Alone again, Ariel paced. The files spread before her like a war map. She wouldn't scream or storm. That wasn't her way. Instead, she'd wield the tools at hand, the legal levers Margaret had overlooked, the foundations Ariel had quietly built. By morning's full light, her decision crystallized. She'd meet Elena, explore the options these documents afforded, and begin dismantling the invisible chains. The silence that had bound her was fracturing, revealing not emptiness, but the roar of impending change. The morning light pierced the curtains like a blade, illuminating the scattered files on Ariel's desk, a testament to her sleepless night of revelation. She hadn't waited for regret to creep in. Instead, she dressed with purpose, choosing a tailored blouse and slacks that felt like armor. By 9 o'clock, she was in Elena Ramirez's downtown office, the city bustling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a stark contrast to the estate's stifling stillness. Elena, with her sharp bob and no-frills demeanor, listened intently as Ariel laid out the documents, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. This power of attorney, it's ironclad, Elena said, scanning the pages. Charles signed it under duress of illness, but it's fully enforceable. The foundation records show your co-founder status. You've been the driving force behind its recent successes. And this Atlanta property clause? It's a sleeper, activated upon proof of contribution disparity. We can argue you've shouldered the bulk of the work. Ariel nodded, her mind racing ahead. I want to transfer operational control of the Ashbourne Foundation to me. Redirect the grants toward underrepresented artists, especially women of color. And the Atlanta house, make it mine outright. It's not revenge, it's restoration. Elena's eyes gleamed with professional admiration. It's smart. We'll file today. But be prepared. Margaret won't take this lying down. The paperwork was a whirlwind of signatures and notarizations, each stroke of the pen a quiet act of defiance. By afternoon, the requests were submitted. Control of the foundation shifted to Ariel as primary director, with veto power over disbursements. The Atlanta cottage, a charming bungalow she'd personally renovated, transferred solely to her name under the deed's equity clause. Notifications would hit the family accounts within days. Digital dominoes set to topple. Back at the estate, Ariel moved through the halls like a ghost reclaiming her form. Charles was out on foundation business, oblivious for now, but Margaret's presence lingered in every polished surface, every heirloom vase. Ariel retreated to her home office, a sunlit nook she'd claimed early in the marriage, surrounded by design sketches and fabric swatches that spoke of her unyielding creativity. She reviewed emails from potential grantees, young Black designers whose work mirrored her own struggles, and felt a surge of purpose. This wasn't destruction, it was redirection, channeling the foundation's resources away from Margaret's pet causes of historical preservation toward something vital, something alive. The first ripple came 2 days later in the form of a crisp email from the bank. Ariel heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath from the drawing room, followed by the rustle of papers. Footsteps pounded toward her office, urgent, accusatory. Margaret burst in, clutching printouts, her face flushed with a rage that stripped away her usual veneer of composure. "What have you done?" she demanded, slamming the documents on the desk. "Transferring the foundation? Seizing the Atlanta property? You've poisoned this house." Ariel rose slowly, meeting her mother-in-law's gaze without flinching. The mark on her cheek had faded to a faint bruise, but the memory fueled her calm. "No, Margaret," she replied evenly, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. "I'm just removing the mold. The foundation was stagnant under your watch. Events for the elite, grants to the same old circles. I've breathed life into it, and now I'll steer it where it matters." Margaret's eyes widened, a mix of shock and betrayal. "You ungrateful. This is my family's legacy. Charles signed those papers in weakness. You manipulated him." Ariel shook her head. "He trusted me. And the deeds? They recognize my contributions. The designs, the funding drives, the vision. I've earned this." The door creaked open then, Charles entering with a bewildered expression, his tie askew from whatever meeting he'd rushed from. He glanced between them, the air thick with confrontation. "What's going on? Mother called me in a panic." Margaret whirled on him. "Your wife is dismantling everything. The foundation, our name, it's all under her control now. And the Atlanta house? Gone." Charles turned to Ariel, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Ariel, is this true?" She held his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, it's legal, Charles. I've been the one keeping the foundation afloat while you and Margaret played at philanthropy. This isn't about taking, it's about claiming what's mine." He hesitated, caught in the cross-currents of loyalty. "But we can talk about this. As a family." Margaret scoffed. "Talk? She's already acted. This is betrayal, pure and simple." Ariel stepped forward, her presence commanding the room for the first time. "Betrayal? Like slapping me in front of my friends? Dismissing my culture as unrefined? You've treated me like an interloper since day one. This house, this legacy, it's built on exclusion. I'm changing that." Charles opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He stood there boggled, neither defending his wife nor confronting his mother, a statue in the storm. Margaret's fury deflated into something raw, her shoulders slumping as she gathered the papers. "You'll regret this," she muttered, her voice cracking for the first time Ariel could recall. She turned and left, the door closing with a soft thud that echoed like defeat. The office fell silent, save for Charles's uneven breathing. "Ariel, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you never listen," she said softly, almost pityingly. "Not really. Go check on her if you must. But this is happening." He lingered a moment longer, then retreated, leaving Ariel alone with the weight of her actions. She sank into her chair, adrenaline fading into a profound stillness. The transfers were in motion. By week's end, the Foundation's board would confirm her authority, and the Atlanta deed would be reissued. It felt like exhaling after years of holding her breath, liberating yet laced with the uncertainty of fallout. 3 days passed in a tense limbo. The estate hummed with unspoken accusations, meals eaten in separate rooms, conversations clipped and superficial. Charles tiptoed around her, offering half-hearted olive branches that she politely declined. Margaret vanished into her routines, garden club meetings, phone calls to old allies. But her absence carried a different tone, stripped of its usual haughtiness. Then on the fourth morning, a knock echoed at Ariel's door, soft, almost hesitant. She opened it to find Margaret standing there, unadorned and unguarded for the first time, as if the foundations of her world had truly shifted. The knock came softly, almost tentatively, pulling Ariel from her thoughts as she stared out the window at the estate's manicured lawns, now bathed in the golden haze of late morning. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in her office, days filled with a brittle tension that hung over the house like fog over the Charleston harbor. Meals were taken in isolation, conversations reduced to necessities, and Charles had become a ghost, shuttling between work and awkward silences. Ariel had thrown herself into the Foundation's new direction, approving grants for emerging Black designers and sketching plans for an inclusive exhibit, but the victory felt hollow amid the domestic chill. She opened the door to find Margaret standing there, a far cry from the imperious figure who had stormed her office. No makeup softened her features. Her hair was loosely pinned, strands escaping like frayed threads. In her hands, she cradled the fragments of a porcelain teacup, its delicate blue patterns shattered into jagged pieces. The very cup from Ariel and Charles's wedding set, a symbol of fragile beginnings. Ariel, Margaret said, her voice lacking its usual command, replaced by a weariness that aged her beyond her years. May I come in? Ariel stepped aside, curiosity overriding her wariness. They hadn't spoken since the outburst, and this vulnerability was uncharted territory. Margaret entered slowly, placing the broken cup on the desk with care, as if handling a relic from a lost era. She didn't sit. Instead, she paced a few steps before turning to face her daughter-in-law. I broke this, she confessed, gesturing to the shards. Not on purpose, at least not consciously. I was dusting the china cabinet this morning, and it slipped. But maybe, like everything else, I held it too tightly. Her eyes met Ariel's, raw and unguarded. I've been holding on too tightly to so much. Ariel leaned against the desk, arms crossed, her bruise now a faint shadow but the memory vivid. She waited, refusing to fill the silence, letting Margaret's words hang like the estate's heavy drapes. This wasn't the Margaret who wielded disdain like a scepter. This was a woman stripped bare, confronting the cracks in her own facade. Margaret drew a breath, her hands clasping together. I've spent my life protecting the Ashbourne name, its history, its traditions, its place in this city. I thought that meant preserving it unchanged, like those roses in the garden, pruned to perfection. But in doing so, I buried the future. I buried you. She paused, her voice cracking slightly. The dinner, the slap, it was inexcusable. I saw your friends, heard their stories, and it threatened everything I clung to. Your vitality, your unapologetic self, exposed my own fears. Fears of change, of losing control. I'm sorry, Ariel, truly, for making you feel like an intruder in your own home, for dismissing your worth. The apology landed like a stone in still water, rippling through Ariel's defenses. She had anticipated anger, denial, perhaps even retaliation, but not this. Part of her wanted to lash out, to hurl back the years of slights, the suggestions to conform, the sidelong glances at her heritage, the way Margaret had turned the estate into a museum of exclusion. Yet another part recognized the humanity in Margaret's admission, the vulnerability that mirrored her own hidden pains. Ariel uncrossed her arms, stepping closer to the broken cup. She picked up a shard, turning it in the light, the porcelain cool against her skin. Sorry as a start, she said quietly, her tone measured, neither accepting nor rejecting. But words don't mend what's shattered. You've built walls around this legacy, Margaret. Walls that kept me out, that stifled what I could bring. The foundation, the property, those were my ways of breaking through. If you're truly sorry, then build with me. But don't pretend it was never broken. Acknowledge the fractures, or they'll only deepen. Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening, but tears held at bay, a testament to her ingrained restraint. I see that now. The foundation, it's thriving under your vision. Those grants you approved, they're bold, inclusive, things I never dared. She hesitated, then continued, her voice gaining strength. Tell me about them, about what you envision. Ariel set the shard down, surprised by the invitation. They sat, Margaret on the edge of the bed, Ariel in her desk chair, and for the first time, a real dialogue unfolded. Ariel spoke of her plans, scholarships for young women of color in design, exhibits blending Southern history with Black narratives, partnerships with communities Margaret had long ignored. As she talked, Margaret listened, not interrupting but absorbing, her questions probing rather than dismissive. And the Atlanta house? Margaret asked softly. What will you do with it? Turn it into a creative retreat, Ariel replied. A space for artists to gather, free from judgment, a place where belonging isn't earned, it's given. Margaret's gaze drifted to the window, where the garden stretched like a canvas of controlled beauty. I grew up in this world, Ariel. traditions that felt like anchors but were really chains. My mother was the same, rigid, unyielding. I thought I was breaking free by marrying into the Ashbournes, but I just traded one cage for another. She turned back, a faint smile breaking through. Perhaps it's time I learned to build instead of guard. The conversation stretched into the afternoon, delving deeper into power dynamics. The weight of Southern legacies tainted by racism, the invisible labor of women like Ariel who navigated them. Margaret shared fragments of her own story. A youth stifled by expectations, a marriage more alliance than affection. Ariel, in turn, revealed the toll of her silences, the way each concession had chipped at her identity. It wasn't absolution, but understanding, a bridge forming over the chasm. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, Margaret rose. "This doesn't erase the past," she said, "but perhaps it can shape the future." She left the room quietly, the broken cup still on the desk, a symbol not of ruin, but of possibility. Ariel sat in the lingering quiet, processing the shift. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but the dialogue had planted seeds of change. That evening, as she reviewed foundation proposals, her mind buzzed with new ideas, ones that might even include Margaret's input. The fractures remained, but for the first time, they felt like openings rather than wounds, leading to a transformation neither woman had anticipated. In the days following their fragile truce, the estate breathed differently, less like a battlefield and more like a canvas mid-stroke, unfinished but promising. Ariel carried the weight of Margaret's apology like a tentative gift, not fully unwrapped, but acknowledged. Their conversation had unearthed buried truths, and in its wake, Ariel found herself energized, channeling the raw emotion into action. The broken porcelain cup remained on her desk, a silent sentinel reminding her that mending required more than words. It demanded creation. She dove deeper into the foundation's reinvention, but a bolder vision emerged, not just reforming the old, but birthing something entirely new. Drawing from the Atlanta property now firmly in her name and the redirected funds, Ariel sketched out the Ariel J Initiative, a scholarship program dedicated to young women of color in art and design. It would offer not only financial support, but mentorship, workshops, and residencies, turning the bungalow into a haven for creativity. "This isn't charity," she told herself as she drafted the proposal late into the night. "It's ignition for dreams like mine that were almost snuffed out." The idea crystallized during a quiet lunch with Elena, her lawyer, who had become an unlikely confidant. "Use the assets strategically," Elena advised over coffee in a bustling cafe downtown. "Seed the initiative with foundation grants, then seek partners. Make it untouchable." Ariel nodded, her mind alight. Back home, she presented the plan to Charles first, cornering him in the study where their marriage had so often played out in half measures. "Charles, I'm launching this initiative," she said, spreading blueprints across his desk. "Scholarships for Black girls in design, full rides, internships, a retreat space in Atlanta. It's what the foundation should have been all along." He looked up from his ledgers, surprise flickering in his eyes. For a moment, the old hesitation surfaced, the pull toward his mother's world. But then he leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Ariel, after everything I see it, you've been carrying us all. If this is your path, I'll step aside. We can live separately for a bit, give you space to build it without the noise here." The offer stunned her. Not rejection, but release. "You mean that?" He nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "I've been a spectator too long. Go make it real. I'll handle mother." Their separation wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors or tearful goodbyes. Charles moved to a downtown apartment that weekend, packing quietly while Ariel focused on logistics. The estate felt larger, emptier, but freer, as if the walls had exhaled. Margaret observed from afar, her interactions with Ariel now laced with cautious respect. One evening, as Ariel reviewed applicant profiles in the sunroom, Margaret entered unannounced, a stack of old foundation ledgers in hand. "I've been going through these," Margaret said, placing them on the table. "Your grants, they're innovative, risky but real." She paused, her posture less rigid, as if the apology had loosened invisible corsets. This initiative of yours, it's bold. You're using the Atlanta house? Ariel met her gaze. Yes, a space for creation, not preservation, for women who've been told to dim their light. Margaret nodded slowly, tracing a finger over the ledgers. You built something real, Ariel. I just hope the Ashbourne name doesn't ruin it, like it almost ruined you. The words carried a sting of truth, but Ariel smiled faintly, her resolve unshaken. It already did. That's why I'm not saving the name. I'm replacing what it stood for, with equity, with voices that were silenced. Margaret didn't argue. Instead, she lingered, asking tentative questions about the program's structure. For the first time, their exchange felt collaborative. Margaret offering contacts from her network, old society friends who could donate, albeit with a wry admission. They'll need convincing, but that's your strength. As she left, a subtle shift hung in the air. Not alliance, but armistice, with potential for more. The initiative launched with a quiet ferocity. Ariel secured partnerships with local galleries and universities, her network of friends rallying, Janelle curating educational modules, Patrice handling legal frameworks, Latoya connecting health resources for mentees, and Amina designing the branding, a vibrant logo of interlocking threads symbolizing woven strengths. Funds flowed from the foundation's coffers, supplemented by crowdfunding that exploded online. Stories of Ariel's vision resonating far beyond Charleston. The Atlanta bungalow transformed under her direction, walls repainted in bold hues, studios equipped with easels and drafting tables, a garden planted with resilient blooms that defied the southern heat. Challenges arose, of course. The board's initial resistance, whispers in high society circles labeling it divisive. One evening, a scathing email from a former donor arrived, echoing Margaret's old sentiments. This isn't what the Ashbournes represent. Ariel stared at it, fingers hovering over the keyboard, then deleted it. Exactly, she murmured. That's the point. Charles visited sporadically, their conversations evolving into honest reflections on their marriage's fractures. I'm proud of you, he admitted during one Atlanta walkthrough, the space alive with fresh paint and possibility. This is you, unfiltered. Their separation stretched, a necessary breath, allowing Ariel to flourish without compromise. As months blurred into preparation, the initiative's inaugural cohort was selected. 10 young women, their portfolios bursting with talent, from textile designs inspired by Gullah traditions to digital art challenging racial stereotypes. Ariel mentored them personally, her own story woven into lessons of resilience. Margaret, true to her word, didn't interfere. But subtle signs emerged. An anonymous donation traced back to her, a quiet endorsement at a garden club meeting. The culmination approached, the inauguration event, a gala at a Charleston cultural center where scholarships would be awarded and the retreat unveiled. Invitations went out, the guest list a blend of old money and new voices. Ariel stood on the bungalow's porch one final afternoon, overseeing final touches, the air humming with anticipation. Little did she know, Margaret had requested a ticket, discreetly without fanfare, positioning herself not at the forefront, but in the shadows, ready to witness the empire Ariel had forged from the ashes of their shared brokenness. The Charleston Cultural Center pulsed with anticipation on the evening of the inauguration, its halls transformed into a vibrant mosaic of art and ambition. String lights draped like constellations overhead, casting a warm glow on the gathered crowd. Emerging artists, community leaders, donors from unexpected corners, and the 10 inaugural scholars whose eyes shone with the fire of untapped potential. Ariel stood backstage, her heart a steady drumbeat amid the hum of voices. The Atlanta bungalow was ready, its doors flung open virtually through projected images on the screens. Studios alive with color, gardens blooming defiantly. This was the culmination, the initiative not just launched, but soaring, funded by a blend of foundation grants, crowdfunding miracles, and partnerships that had multiplied like roots taking hold. As the MC introduced her, Ariel stepped onto the stage, the spotlight enveloping her like an embrace. She wore a dress of her own design, flowing silk in deep indigo, embroidered with subtle motifs from gula baskets, a quiet nod to her heritage. The audience quieted and she began, her voice resonant and unyielding. Tonight we celebrate not just scholarships, but sanctuaries, places where young women of color can dream without apology, create without constraint. I was told to be grateful for the scraps of space I was given, to be quiet in rooms that weren't built for my voice, to be small so others could loom large. I chose instead to be undeniable. The words landed like sparks on dry tinder, igniting applause that rolled through the hall. Ariel scanned the crowd, spotting her friends in the front row. Janelle beaming, Patrice nodding fiercely, Latoya and Amina clapping with pride. Charles sat nearby, his presence supportive but distant, a bridge to the past rather than the future. But then, in the back row, half shadowed by the exit lights, she saw her. Margaret, standing alone, her posture straight but not rigid, her face a mask of quiet absorption. No fanfare, no announcement. She had come uninvited in the spotlight, slipping in like a spectator to her own reckoning. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between them. Before Ariel continued, her resolve deepened by the unexpected witness. The ceremony unfolded with grace, scholars sharing their visions, a slideshow of the Atlanta Retreat's transformation, and toasts to new beginnings. As the evening wound down, guests mingled, the air alive with connections forged and futures mapped. Ariel circulated, hugging mentees, thanking donors, but her mind drifted to Margaret, who lingered at the edges, observing without intrusion. When they finally crossed paths near the coat check, Margaret offered a small nod. "It's impressive," she said softly, her voice stripped of pretense. "You've created something lasting." Ariel tilted her head, searching her mother-in-law's eyes. "It's only the start, but thank you for being here." Margaret hesitated, then reached into her purse, pulling out a check. "An anonymous contribution," she murmured, pressing it into Ariel's hand. "From someone learning to let go." With that, she turned and slipped into the night, her silhouette fading against the city's glow. A woman not fully redeemed, but evolving, step by reluctant step. Weeks later, the TEDx stage in a packed auditorium amplified the initiative's ripple effects. Ariel had been invited to speak, her story now a beacon for others navigating similar shadows. The lights dimmed and she took the podium, the audience a sea of faces hungry for inspiration. She wove her tale with masterful strokes, the estate's gilded cage, the dinner's shattering slap, the silent reclamation through legal levers and bold visions. "I could have burned it all down," she said, her voice rising with passion. "The house, the legacy, the illusions of harmony. Fire is easy, screaming, even easier. But true power, it's in the foundation, not destroying, but structuring anew, not scorching the earth, but planting seeds that outlast the storms. My revenge wasn't fire, it was the foundation, not screaming, but structuring, not burning the house, but building one where I finally belonged." The applause thundered, a cathartic release that echoed her own inner triumph. Off-stage, messages flooded her phone, from scholars thriving in Atlanta, from women sharing their stories of quiet rebellions, even from Charles, who had begun therapy, acknowledging his role in the fractures. Back at the estate, now shared in a redefined peace, Ariel found Margaret waiting in the sunroom, a cup of tea steaming between them. "I've been thinking," Margaret said, her tone reflective, "about the garden. It's time to replant, add some of those resilient blooms you mentioned." It was a small gesture, but symbolic. Margaret attending a foundation meeting the next week, offering insights without dominance, learning to share the soil. Ariel's life unfolded in layers of belonging. Mornings mentoring in Atlanta, afternoons designing spaces that healed, evenings with friends who had become family. The initiative grew, scholarships expanding, the retreat a hub of innovation where young women laughed without fear, created without apology. Charles and she navigated a new equilibrium, separate homes, shared respect, perhaps even a rekindled friendship. And Margaret? She began her own quiet shifts, reading books on racial equity, volunteering at community events, her world widening inch by inch. In the end, Ariel stood on the veranda of the estate one twilight, the magnolias whispering secrets of change. She had built a future where she belonged, not by erasing the past but by transcending it. The woman who didn't burn it down had risen from the ashes she refused to create, her empire not of flames, but of enduring light. And in that light, even the shadows learned to soften. If this story of quiet resilience and reclaimed power resonated with you, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. What would you do in Ariel's shoes? Like and subscribe for more tales of transformation. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Your presence means everything. Until next time, remember, true strength builds, never burns. Stay empowered.